of knowledge to another. That's how she's saying. Because obviously she's challenging the notion of people who convert are just weak or lured into it by other gains, etc. And she's saying, what if people actually, when if it's their choice, it is a choice about a different system of knowledge to which they belong, which you can see actually. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. The ones who are interested are here. So, okay. So, for her, then, instead of what the argument against literacy education conversion as being linked to, let's say, Christian education leading to conversion, which where she says this argument says that the moment of violence starts precisely at the moment, therefore, of literacy, right? And she's saying the argument is completely the other way, and she's saying that if we do not agree that the people who are deciding to change their religion are doing it for reasons other than their actual belief or choice, then the moment of crisis is the moment they decide it. And it's violence, not in the sense of they're weak and they do it without thinking about it clearly because of other external factors. It's a moment of crisis because they're marking a break, a discontinuity with a system of knowledge, and they're changing into another. It's a tall claim to make. I mean, you have to decide on whether you want. So she's saying, and the other thing is, and this is very important, which is why I brought it up. She says, if we accept community, plurality to be the basis of a community, then this moment of conversion also brings that into crisis, because then plurality is not working. Like you're rejecting one and moving on into another. So it's creating a crisis both for this idea of a system of knowledge as a unitary whole to which you subscribe, and at the same time to the notion that the community of believers or any community, it's heterogeneous, because you're rejecting one as homogeneous and you're moving into another. And for her, the importance of conversion is precisely this choice, which she says allows the people converting to be critical of the one they're leaving behind, but also accept the new one, but being aware of its problems and possibilities. And I said that, I would say that very recently, after I came to India, I was watching some, all these 24-hour news channels, they're constantly showing something or the other. So it was about the new neo-Buddhist conversions of Dalit. And there the family is clearly saying, I mean, this partly substantiates her point. They're not saying that we are doing it for this reason, that, and Buddhism doesn't, give you, let's say, material benefits, the usual kind of stereotypical association with, Christian missionaries and Christianity. Then we are doing it because this is a faith that gives us dignity. And it had tremendous resonance for me because I worked on Mohima Dharma, and those people said the same thing. They never said that, we are lower caste, or they just felt that, just this idea that we have the absolute, who can't be in a way conceptualized, but the most, let's say, the supreme absolute as our prime refuge or shelter, that gives us a sense of not just of security, but also of dignity in an otherwise, again, difficult world where they don't feel. These are very ordinary marginal people, and but they're not actually talking about caste or whether they can go into temples or they can't go into temples. Dignity actually is very important because I heard it again and again amongst these people. So there is, I mean, I found resonance when I heard this Dalit couple would convert it, and they were saying a sense of dignity, and in contrast to the total kind of indignity and discrimination we faced in Hinduism. Now, that might also be a construct in certain cases. And I'll give you an example. We are very, very close friends with this Dalit artist, Savi Sabar. Okay. And we became friends because we met in Mexico, and individually and separately, because it was a big Diwali party at the Indian embassy, to which we almost never go, but Saurabh's mother was there, so we thought, okay, she might as well meet a few Indians, etc. So we went, and we ran into Savi, and Saurabh ran into him first, and both of us, we liked him, of course, but as I said, separately, on two separate occasions, we said, come home for a meal. And, for us, it was the most kind of normal thing to say, which we would do to anybody. When he came home, he said, I warmed up to you immediately because both of you, both Brahmins, without talking to each other, without thinking, asked me over for a meal. So I'm saying, see the difference in experience. And so I said, but why should that be, such a striking thing to you? He said, in Mexico City, the Indian community, very small Indian community, they have treated, I can't say that they have not treated me well or anything, but none of them have asked me over for a meal. Right? So he put it down to his Dalit status. And so when I often felt, maybe at times he overdoes it, but no. We have to understand, because we have not gone through that sense of vulnerability, it's extremely difficult to capture. Because at times it does seem that, they are overdoing it and they're pinning down everything that happens to them to the fact of their low status, right? But as I said, it's impossible for us to feel that sense of vulnerability. Something that I was saying yesterday, that, why and how and when people feel threatened, real threat or an imagined threat, it is very delicate and it's very difficult to capture, right? So Gauri Vishwanathan's argument, taking the other way, she's saying that these people, the ones who are converting, are actually producing a crisis, which they are by rejecting this one and converting to the other. Now, Neo-Buddhism or Buddha conversion to Buddhism, if it grows on a much larger scale, I don't know if if that will also evoke a very serious reaction. We do not know. It still hasn't, because as you know, Buddhism is thought to be what? With native to India, and it's almost like a part of this larger idea of Hinduism. But if this happens on a large scale, we don't have censuses anymore, or do we? I mean, census where religions are important? We don't, right?
We do. So no, religion is important. Caste is not religion.
Caste is not religion. No, but do we have all Indians? We do. Yes, of course we do. But yes, caste is not important. So if there comes a stage where, again, there's a threat perceived by the majority, which we have to question. That even this conversion is creating serious problems. We don't know what kind of reaction it will. So, but Vishwanathan's argument is more along discursive lines. Knowledge systems into another knowledge system. As I said, my problem is this idea of total rupture. Because precisely if you're thinking of the knowledge system, they understand, the people who are changing, they understand the beliefs and practices through something they already know. Which is why I said you have vernacular Christianity, you have vernacular Catholicism. In Mexico, it's so clear. If you go to especially the southern part of Mexico, they they still call spirits. I mean, all kinds of stuff. I mean, the saints and their ancestors and other spirits are kind of worshipped together on special days. And forget about, Virgin de Guadalupe, of course, is a totally, they feel very proud that the Virgin of Guadalupe is Mexico's contribution to Christianity. Right? So that's different. But I'm saying the way they have kind of understood and made this Catholicism their own, which is a process that happens every day. So for me, therefore, this, the complete break she's talking about, rather than paying attention to this very rich world, as I said, of gray, is a problem. But her point there is that it also shakes the notion of community based on plurality. So from there, I'll take off, because the readings of today, again, deal precisely with that. How do you deal with, how do we cope with, heterogeneity, plurality, not oneness? Because, everyone sees this, and, it's so kind of banal that, Indian society is so diverse, and all societies are diverse. Can you really think of societies where there's no sense of class, no sense of community, no sense of group identity? So, at times I get a little annoyed with my students when they say this thing, but Indian society, yes, we are enormous in terms of numbers, yes. So I said, if you think of your population 20 times more, what would your society look like, right? So I mean, and I also always remember my supervisor, who was a very stern supervisor. I had written something about it's very complex. One of my first written assignments I handed over for my thesis thing, and he says, can you think of something except an amoeba that's not complex? So I mentioned pathogenesis, but this is the kind of training I have got. And if you are familiar with subordinate studies, attention to language is so important. So it was a lesson, early on, that choose your words extremely carefully. Do not say something that actually ends up meaning nothing. He says, what are you trying to tell me? That, this world is complex. That's why he said, anything except an amoeba that's not complex. So keep these things in mind. The details are extremely important. So rather than saying something is complex, which he was right, doesn't really explain anything. I think it's a way of getting away by saying nothing. So, but to come back to this point, so heterogeneity, plurality, divisions exist in different forms all across. And yet you try and construct notions and identities through different elements, something we discussed yesterday. And these elements vary, and it depends on particular moments, particular circumstances, which is why they are always contingent. They are dependent on other factors of that particular moment, and they can change over time, and hence contingent, right? So today's readings then take up precisely these ideas. And before I move, I'll let you speak. I have, borrowed on others, but I have a formulation. Nation, we know, is now the form of the nation state, or nation as the imagined community by the state is accepted, let's say, as the only form of political community. Like only form of, let's say, legitimate political community. Which is why any other form of, community formation carries with it a sense of, something not quite right. When we use things like that is secessionist, right? That is going to ruin the integrity of India. Or even not that, parochialism. Right? That's very parochial, that's very local, that's very provincial. Where are we speaking from? We are precisely speaking from the idea of a unified nation, which is also, with the idea of the state, which is also territorial. Right? This is very important for the second reading, for Faisal Devji's reading, where he's saying that there's no idea of the territory. And what we have to think of are the possibilities where this connection between the nation or the territory or the, a community the nation as the legitimate political community is brought into crisis by several other movements of identity. Sumati Ramaswamy, in her first book, Passions of the Tongue, had also mentioned this. She said, our idea of, the problem lies with us. We try and see everything through the lens of nationalism. Hence, it becomes, for the Odia, since I work on Odia, it's linguistic nationalism, right? It can be Bodo nationalism. She said the fault line is like it's nationalism, which is the default mode that your computer has set for you. She didn't say it then because computers weren't as much in use, but Mrinalini Sinha says that's what it said. We fall back upon to conceptualize all these movements where you are trying to formulate a community on different grounds. It's our fault, sorry. Our fault that we always try and see it through the lens of nationalism. And she's raising the question where Tamil is thought of as a goddess to whom you need owe devotion like you do to a mother. Why should we think of it necessarily as linguistic nationalism? Why can't we think of it as a separate relationship of a devotee and the object of devotion, the goddess? So these questions have been raised before. But nationalism, therefore, as something I mentioned yesterday, nationalism, let's say, also pushed by the state, the modern state, as the only form of political, legitimately political imagined community, is always in, let's say, competition with several other forms of community formations. That's one. Now, how does nationalism, we'll leave that aside for a moment, but how does nationalism form the imagined community? I would say there are two models. One is the French model, and which is why they had so many problems with the veil, etc., which comes from, as you know, the idea of laicite very strongly, that we are all equals, and hence we do not accept any mark of difference in public life. There's always, as you know, there's always persuasion and coercion involved, but that is the notion, that we do not accept any mark of difference in public life because we are all equals, and which is why the use of the veil was so much problem, which would not have been a problem in India ever. Why? Because India, because of its experience, because of the fact it comes, it's a case of late colonialism and also late decolonization, etc., starts on the premise and the actual real experience, let's say, of partition and all the problems associated with the formation of the nation state, starts from the model of idea of we are heterogeneous, we are plural, and yet how do we belong to this? Yes, how do we belong to this notion of the community? How to generate the sense of belonging amongst a population that is, exceedingly heterogeneous. That's the Indian model. If you think of it again, people say things that suddenly make you think, oh, I never thought of that. This is a professor of American history in Cornell. He told us several years ago, and that is linked to secularism. He said, we love traveling to India. All religious festivals are holidays. In the US, impossible. In France, impossible. So that made me think he's right. So we start from the premise that we are heterogeneous, and yet we create a sense of unity, of belonging to this imagined community. So, and how do you create the sense of belonging? Another person who died very young and I respected a lot, Burton Stein. I had the very good fortune of meeting him when we were in England in the early 90s at the India Office Library. Blackfriars still there. By he says in his book, he also has a history of India which was published posthumously. Right? He says, so there are two ways of constituting this imagined community. One is, as I said, not recognizing any difference. The other is actually recognizing difference and looking for common elements. So these common elements are communitarian elements. What else are they? Right? So communitarian elements can be language, can be region, can be anything, right? Uh, Communitarian preference, he says, so there's nothing wrong in trying to form the idea of a larger community through elements that also can constitute other communities. So he's saying that this idea, something that Zavos says, which is why I'm bringing it up, that, and is read and taught, which we are precisely. Nationalism starting off as this great noble ideal and ideology, and then it is completely overtaken by this negative force of communalism. And obviously, who's responsible? We'll go into that later, but we all know, right? So, so that first point to question, ponder on is that. If you think of community, communal as deriving from community, there is nothing wrong in that. There's nothing negative in that. There's nothing pejorative in that. The idea is that the state, the nation state, as since it sanctions the notion of the nation as the only politically legitimate and viable form of community, and in the eyes of the nation state, and derives from the idea of a very strong unified nation, which is why all these problems, the coercion that goes into it in, forming this nation. And besides, the other problem is that there were from the beginning groups, people, communities who did not actually relate to this idea of the nation. What happens then? It's not just the fragments become visible only with, in the course of history. Fragments were there from the beginning, but we did ideal imagined community probably didn't have any resonance. And we've never taken them into consideration. Right? So that's the unresolved problem. Because then it is true that anti-British sentiment was strong. The world over, as you know, also it was growing. Sentiments, public opinion against colonization was growing. US is putting great pressure, after the Second World War. So all kinds of things. Nehru is attending all these anti-colonial leagues and stuff from before. So that takes over. Let's first get freedom and then decide. But there are all these people who were saying that that's not right. We cannot decide after. We have to decide. As I said, the idea was if it's an imagined community, premise, which Pastor Chatterjee also mentions, you can imagine it in very different ways, right? Whose imagined community? If you give, the moment you give so much power or authority to the idea of imagination, the next question is, who is imagining it and how? And it is impossible to think that people would, even the ones, the great nationalists, would impose, imagine it in exactly the same way. Very. So whose imagined community? And precisely that, because of that, not just Pastor Chatterjee, Gyan Pandey, all the others are speaking of the fragments who did not imagine and made India this way, and who never could relate to this sense of the imagined community. And as I said, it is our problem that we always read them, as I said, as secessionists, as anti-national, as communal meaning, like something very, very terrible. So, as I said, I'm just giving you hints to how I would want the discussion to go. So now you comment on those. One more important thing about imagining. Gandhi, when he says in the non-cooperation declaration, he says that if you do all this for within a year, there will be Swaraj. Right? And this brilliant work, of course, I don't know if all of you have read Shahid Amin, but they're brilliant works that show precisely, people who did not understand the non-cooperation program at all, and people for whom the non-cooperation program had absolutely no relevance. Boycott sports, boycott educational institutions, think of it for, peasants or whoever. And the program, actual program of non-cooperation, Congress program of non-cooperation, had actually no meaning for loads of people. But what had meaning for them, tremendous significance, is the idea of Swaraj, which Gandhi never defined clearly. So, it's Swaraj. Again, you imagine it the way you think your Swaraj would be. So, for, peasants, when we speak of peasants, as you know, in India, most of them are, sharecroppers or landless laborers. These are not people who own enough land and toiling, which is a common idea of peasants. So many of them thought that Swaraj would mean that we will not have to pay rents anymore. Swaraj would mean, let's say, if all the money lenders' debts would be wiped off, all kinds of ways. Which is why, Shahid Amin's brilliant work, Gandhi as Mahatma. He's saying it's the peasants who are making Gandhi the Mahatma, but within a year, it is Gandhi who has to suspend the movement because these people who did not understand the message have, become turned violent. And he has another article, brilliant one, maybe you could look that up in Postcolonial Passages, which is a shorter version. It's called They Also Followed Gandhi. Because there's total incomprehension. Because these people, who in a mood of jubilation, there was a feast, everything, and then they go to the police station. Another mark of Swaraj was also that, because by then, the Indian police has become extremely hated as a symbol of the state, right? Because you don't really know what the colonial state is like. You know it only through the ones who are, immediate. So the badge, the policeman's badge, it also gave authority, but that authority people understood that it's a vigilant authority that can cause, several problems in your life. Right. So when they go there in a mood of jubilation, and then one fires in the air, they didn't understand. They thought again the policeman's rifle, as you know, there was tremendous fear. What are they saying? They're saying the power of the Mahatma or power of Gandhiji will turn the bullets into water. So, just think of Swaraj, imagining, and this is linked to the idea of religion, politics. Can you ever separate them? Keep this in mind. So they, go in a mood, as I said, of jubilation. Then it turns violent. But when Gandhi says that, they have put blood in my hands, there's total incomprehension. That's why he says they also followed Gandhi, because they thought they were doing what, Gandhi Baba. Have you read the ones who read Bengali? Thorai Charit Manush. You must Shabinath Gandhi. So he's Gandhi Baba. It's not even, they don't know. It's Baba, and you are seeing Baba's footsteps here, or you're seeing his face appear in the midst of trees somewhere else. Yes.
Even Raja Rao does that sort of a thing. That instead of the Mahabharata Katha, they talk about Gandhi Katha. And then the problem arises with the Swamiji. He says, this is not our dharma.
Yes.
That sort of thing. And the Swami is rewarded by the British. So the Gandhi as a deity sort of a figure is quite well represented.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? Shahid, and others have said that it's not as if the Congress volunteers did not know of it. Actually, they're capitalizing on that. Because think of our own notion of the masses. Despite subaltern studies, despite everything, ignorant, illiterate masses, So our election or electoral process goes wrong because of them. Never because of us. Right? So it's the same idea that let them come into the Congress movement because they think of Gandhi as Baba or deity or whatever. So it's saying that, so these Congress volunteers are doing nothing to stop this when it's happening. They're actually capitalizing on that. So, which is why also there's total incomprehension. When Gandhi suspends the movement, they do not realize. And what Shahid Amin has done, if you ever have a chance, it's absolutely fascinating. He's done field work for 10 years. He's from UP in the Gorakhpur region, amongst the survivors of, meaning the families, the people who still live of those families of the Rajas. Okay, and the book is called Event, Metaphor, Memory. And what is he saying? That Chauri Chaura therefore becomes only a footnote, and a very sad footnote in the history of the nationalist struggle. Earlier, it's changed now because now there's a station, etc., because there's a rethinking of history from that region. But earlier, it was only a very unfortunate footnote because it was an event that made Gandhi suspend the movement. So he's worked amongst those people, and his book is called Event, Metaphor, Memory. So if you ever get a chance, just look it up. Anyway, so that is what I am, pointing to before I go into, about the readings you speak, as I said, about the readings you would speak, but the idea of the nation, the nationalism, more than that, community. What is your idea of community? How do you relate to it? How do you identify with it? It always will be extremely plural, extremely varied. And the problem is precisely to make all these very different imaginings fall in line with what we call the mainstream or the official discourse. So, and that is why there's always an element of coercion, along with persuasion. Of course, I'm not saying that, but the problem is, what becomes supreme when the element of coercion surpasses the element of persuasion, then we think nationalism is in crisis. And even with this element of coercion and persuasion, as I said, there are people who never really identified with this idea of this wider imagined community, people whom we forgot for various reasons or did not pay attention to because we thought they didn't. Of the consensus. Maintain their distance from the from the European companies when they came, because that's another interesting history we can't go into. People like Lord Martin, who made huge careers in the service of the East India Company, English East India Company, something that changes completely in the 19th century. There was a sense of Britishness and Frenchness, something I mentioned briefly. Okay, but in the 18th century, it's still happening. Swiss people from other nationalities are owning Caribbean. Yes, forget that. But the point is, once the censuses show that the Muslims, the aristocratic Muslims in United Provinces are a minority, and in that sense, like almost a pathetic minority in terms of numbers, they just could not accept it. Because this idea of majority, now we call it majority, it comes from a sense of privilege and entitlement, something I mentioned yesterday. We do not think about that. So they were the more refined groups. They were the earlier, ruling groups, and actually very refined and cultured, which is why they kept their distance from the Europeans, because that's what they weren't, cultured enough. So not just that you are a minority, you also realize that by keeping your distance from these people who have now displaced you, completely as the ruling group, you also have fallen behind your Hindu counterparts in education, in employment, because they had not taken to English education. Think of Syed Ahmed and all that. So it's a total shock. So it's not just the idea of numbers. It's the idea that we who were the cultured, refined groups and the ruling classes of yesteryear are now a minority, not only in terms of numbers, that our educational qualification, our culture, our refinement does not amount to very much in this current world. So keep that in mind. So when we speak of, the UK Muslims and why they supported something that Faisal brings up, why they supported, knowing fully well that, probably UP will never go to Pakistan. It's this idea of privilege and entitlement, which gave them the sense they were complicit. They did not think that slowly they were being dislodged, but they did not realize it comes as a total shock in the second half of the 19th century, and it sparks off very different reactions amongst this group. So keep this in mind, and now, yes, your thoughts. Pseudo-secular, yeah. Yes, yes. Yes. Can you give me the page number? Let me just see the thing quickly so that I can place it here. Sure.
Actually, I have several thoughts and comments. Again, this spring because my disciplinary training is in sociology and anthropology and not in history. The problem that I constantly see in historiography, is the fact that there has been a dominance of nationalist historians while writing or justifying nationalism in India. And when they're doing that, which sociologists or anthropologists do emphasize, we have to make a strong distinction between the nation state, the imagined nation, and the community, the nationality. And a lot of the Indian historiography suffers from this jettisoning, not acknowledging that fact that an Indian nation is a construction of several nationalities. It's a political process. It's not a cultural homogeneous nation. So if we give community our ethnic identification a positive image, why should it be termed being communal in the negative sense? It's something which even John Zevers does not address properly.
But that's what precisely Gyan Pandey and the others are doing. It's not
but then looking at it as a, when you moment you see it, you call it a fragment. Again, you're not giving it the importance. For me as an anthropologist, the fact that you have a community identity and ethnic identity is not a sense of fragmentation. It's a sense of one's own central self. Isn't that right? Why should I treat this as a response of the fragments? For the anthropologist or for the sociologist, the nation state is a political imagination. It is not necessarily a socio-cultural imagination. You create your nation states, a political community, which can be from your cultural communities of belonging. You need to distinguish between the political body of the nation state vis-a-vis your nationality and the challenges which are coming in on a political level and not necessarily on a socio-cultural level. I mean, even if you look at Faisal Devji's or when you look at the discussions on Hinduism, there's so much of difference between North and South, East and West, and what is this so-called Hinduism or Hindu communalism? It's a variant of particular trends, isn't that right? So why are the problem? It may be incorrect. I'm not a historian, but what I've read is the problem is of the Indian nationalist historians justifying this, keeping the Indian nation together in the post-colonial period, where you really don't want to acknowledge cultural differences. They have to be submerged to give justification and legitimation to the entire body of the Indian nation.
But I don't think Indian historians are doing that. In fact, I started by saying
it's a current trend. It's a current trend, but if you look at the historiography of that period, I mean, subaltern school is one part of Indian historiography. You have other historians as well. This is a problem that you find in a lot of the history which is taught in colleges and schools.
Yes, that is true. But I'm saying Sumatri Ramaswamy is not a part of suburban schools at all. She's questioning this idea, notion of looking everything through the nation. The other person.
Sumati also has a stronger anthropological background.
Sanjay Seth is also questioning the idea of why should we look at everything through the idea of the nation. And not just that, he's saying the idea of the nation is a tautology. We know that it's a new construct, and yet we say that it's existed for a very long time, and then we try and find the elements to show that it has existed for a long time. So he's saying it's completely tautologous.
But if you look at popular history, which is taught in schools and colleges, it's got a very pedagogical function of legitimizing the Indian nation state, where assertion of your own ethnic self is seen as something which is negative. I think the problems start with that sense of why should I deny my ethnicity to be submerged in this political big mass of people.
But then how do you define ethnicity? Which element of your ethnicity, ethnic identity?
Ethnicity is about boundary maintenance, but it's about creation or classification principles of inclusion and exclusion. It is always contingent, it is always historical, it is always relational. It's not going to be something which is fixed forever. You have to be looking at ethnic identification as a dynamic process. Isn't that right? To think of nationalism as being one ethnic community is again a problem of Western nationalism.
But the point is precisely, what I've been mentioning is that Indian nationalism did not think of India, the nation of India, as Hindu. It's not one ethnic community.
No, it's the fact that it was not Hindu did not mean that you're not acknowledging other minorities. There's a preoccupation with when you think of minorities, you only think of the Muslims. You don't think of the Buddhists or the Christians. When you think of Buddhism, you mention New Buddhism. But in South Asia, I mean, what is happening in Myanmar is again impacting us. It's impacting Bangladesh. You have a strong current of Buddhist nationalism available in Bhutan, in Sri Lanka, and adjoining states as well. But we somehow seem to be preoccupied with, when we think of communalism and nationalism, it's Hindus versus the Muslims.
Exactly. I began by questioning that.
We're not acknowledging or giving due space to other forms of religious discourse. And even if you look, when I've been looking at the Dalit conversion issues recently in sociology and the Constituent Assembly debates and things like that, one of the things which is justified, so when you lose your Dalit status, the moment you convert into Christianity or Islam. But in 1957 and then in 1990, the Sikhs and the Buddhist Dalits were acknowledged, have an entitlement as a scheduled caste. The other religious groups have been declined, because then what is the reason that you're converting? The Dalit is an identity which is fixed from your low caste, untouchable position in the Hindu caste order. The moment you convert, the other religious groups do not have that same conception of caste. Isn't that right? So again, we're making
the vernacularization of the religion.
So we are again distinguishing between the Semitic religions which have come from outside, like Islam and Christianity, and we're not acknowledging that Buddhism, Jainism, or Sikhism have religious discourses of their own. They all were census categories also.
Absolutely, and that's what while we were walking through, that's what we talk. I think the problem lies there, that we've never quite reflected. We haven't as to the tremendous and the enduring impact of the, not just the census, the classification and the actually the colonial policies based on those classifications. If it was just classification, probably it would not have had that kind of impact. And why do I say that? Once the Muslims are declared to be a minority, they are given separate electorates in the 1909 reforms. And people, again, their historians have questioned that this meant people who did not think that they were a minority first are just being made into a permanent minority. And what kind of implications did that have? A transformation of a social identity into a political community, into a political electorate. So it's not as if we haven't thought about that. I mean, there are these questions have been raised again and again, that when we discuss nationalism, communalism, no one wants. We always read it as, oh, the Muslims were favored by the British, which they were. You know, this famous, ill-famous policy of divide and rule, to a certain extent. But the point is, what kind of implications, what kind of impact did it have on an extremely heterogeneous community? As you know, the Muslims, the Bengali Muslims, were looked down upon openly, right, by what we call the upcountry Muslims. Why? They didn't even speak. They didn't speak, right? They spoke Bengali. And it's true also during the Swadeshi movement. The lower, the poorer groups of Hindus and Muslims had more in common amongst each other than they had with their upper caste Babus. In fact, there are stories that they say that the Babus are in trouble because the Babus have been, close to the colonial state, and now the colonial state doesn't like the Babus. So let's try and make something, take advantage of the situation where the Babus are under pressure. So it's, I mean, it is our problem, I agree. But what we are questioning is precisely a state-centered view, and not just a state-centered view, a view based, looked at, from Delhi. And it has been, people have their brilliant works on the 18th century. Precisely, they say it's not a period of decline. If we are looking at it from the regions that are coming up, these are extremely rich cultures. So yes, nation and nationalism, and I think I began precisely by raising the points you are raising. That we do not want to read history and nationalism and communalism as one, as I said, nationalism as this very noble ideology which is completely getting detracted, and so yes, I agree with you there. But the idea of ethnicity, and I would be a little more careful about saying, Islam and Christianity coming from outside, and not because, as I said, we have indigenized, we have
it's not why. It's not how they justify why Dalit Sikhs or Dalit Buddhists can get scheduled caste, benefit, but the moment you become Christians or you're Muslims, then you can't get the benefit.
Yes,
it's not my view.
No, I know.
This is the Constituent Assembly view, and this is the Supreme Court judgments on conversion, by the way.
Yes,
lose your rights.
Yes.
There's a doctrine of eclipse. So even if you convert back to Hinduism, you convert back to what state your so-called, ancestral past as a Dalit. You can't change your position in the Varna order. Also, we have Supreme Court judgments on conversion of Dalits, which have brought these issues to the fore.
But those problems you can point out in 2 minutes. So, what are the 4 religious communities that have their personal laws? Hindus, Muslims, Christians, and Parsis. No one else. And why would Hindus, as the majority community, have this special privilege? So, these questions are endless, and it's good if we can bring them up at, in course of these discussions. But I do agree with you, and we are in agreement in the sense that I said I started by questioning these ideas, precisely the ones that you're questioning. Yes. More comments, yes.
Yeah, regarding this whole Sikh and Sikh and
yes, if you can link these arguments with what Zabos is saying, maybe we could also have a,
just responding to the fact, you just said that the Indian nationalism did not conceptualize itself as a Hindu. In certain ways, I think it did, because the iconography of the nation as the Hindu goddess, it began from there, and then it continued in various ways. Like, I think this whole dichotomy that if you convert to Islam and if you convert to Christianity, you'd lose your Dalit status, because also the religions talk of equality in some way, which Hinduism doesn't. But the other thing, then the nation state is falling in line with what Savarkar said about the Janmabhoomi Punyabhoomi thing, because Sikhs and the others have Punyabhoomi here.
Yes.
So they are part of our heritage,
Absolutely.
while Islam and Christianity. So the nation state is acknowledging in certain ways the Hindu nationalist view.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I'll give you an example. We have gone over it again in a course of the lectures. Someone like Rabindranath. Someone like Rabindranath. I agree completely. Point is, Islam, as you know, is opposed to any kind of iconography. So then you are trying. That's another problem. Nation is an idea, but it cannot function. No idea can just function at a discursive level. We want, some kind of material basis to any discursive idea. Okay, so keep that in mind. And there are brilliant works on how this, materiality is given to the idea of the nation. Look at Manu Goswami. What is she saying? She's saying first it's an economic collective. The Congress leaders, whom we call moderates, the economic critique of colonialism comes from them. They are total loyalists. Think of Dadabhai Nauroji's book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. So the British state is not behaving in the proper British way in the colony, and hence poverty. So what is the idea of the nation there? Economic collective. It changes. We should not, jump into this conclusion that easily. Keep that in mind. It's an economic collective. Think of the Swadeshi movement again. We do not want, Manchester cloth and Lancashire cloth. Economic collective, right? When Avanindranath draws, which is why I should have brought my book. When Avanindranath draws, first he draws Mother Bengal, and then it becomes Mother India. Where is a map? No map there. Absolutely no map. It's an ascetic woman's figure. So we have to be careful about these things. So but on the other hand, when you are thinking of iconography, just think of a very rich goddess tradition. So someone like Rabindranath, who is an internationalist and humanist, openly criticizing nationalism in Japan on the eve of the First World War. Very early on, when he is thinking of the nation as mother, what is he saying? Bangladesher hridoy hote kokhon aponi ei oporup rupe bahirole janmani. But he evokes the image of the goddess because it's a glorious image. I don't think he is consciously thinking. You see, these are the tragedies, or these are the, let's say, the complexities, in this sense, complexities we would never be able to discern completely. I would stop before saying that when Rabindranath is writing those songs or thinking of, of conjuring an idea of the mother as a goddess, he's thinking of it as Hindu. It's the rich, source of iconography that, these Hindu, let's say, rituals and Hindu images offer, that he falls back on. What will he draw upon? He will think of it. So let's think he's consciously thinking, I am very secular and hence I will not, what other? Islam, Buddhism, unless you go into Mohammedan Buddhism or Sikhism. What kind of iconography? You see, something that evokes, and immediate, let's say, devotion, dedication, and hence the goddesses. And that's precisely the point. It's not the nation. We have to think of other modes of identification, other modes of of relating to or feeling that this is the way I can think of loving whatever you want. So yes and no. It's not as if I'm not saying. Then it becomes increasingly Hindu. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying when you think of Rabindranath, even he is doing it. Yes, more comments. Sorry, we just reached the 1 hour, but if you want to continue, I'm fine. Yeah? So I would also like to discuss Gyan Pandey a little bit, although it's suggested. But Zavos first. Yeah, the page number.
That's the first.
But he puts it in, doesn't he put it in single quotes?
The second line. Is it the second line? Third line.
It was this legitimacy.
The second line. Exponents often present it as the real
It used to identify autonomous or Hindu communism, which emerged as an historical condition. Okay, the point is, I mean, I'm not going into what you are asking, but I think another point we need to keep in mind very clearly for the second session also is the difference, people are making between idea and ideology. Because ideology can be good or bad, of course, because ideology has a normative package. Okay, so keep that in mind. And the idea does not necessarily have that normative package. Okay? Yes.
It mentions that there is a strategic relation to culture itself in terms of which I read.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
Politics, which is
Yeah, and this others have said once it becomes an ideology, it's terrible, right? And he is also saying that there's not that much wrong. But then, as I said, for me, it was not very new because many of the Congress leaders were also members of the Hindu Mahasabha when it came up, and it is a direct response to what? First, the creation of the Muslim League, and two, the granting of separate electorate to the Muslims as a minority community in the 1909 reforms. So, you selected the reading of Sheikh. I would like your comments.
I was just trying to ponder upon what Shikapapa read, the pseudo-secularist thing. I was trying to relate with Gadget's introduction to nation and its values that he brought up. It immediately reminded me of I think within the first 5-6 pages, that Gadget makes a distinction of urban popular Bengali culture, and it is a distinction between urban culture and the folk culture and the industrial space, I think, the tradition of folk theatre. But then again, people like Chetty will deeply critical of this taxonomy of some of the problems that we are discussing. Is again making a distinction between the folk and the urban culture. And as you said, you invoked a lecture with these linguistic categories that we deploy to understand the world with. I think there's a problem there. Which I think, I'm just trying to ponder upon it. Taking cues from the problem that you raised. I'm trying to think. Even Chatterjee, who is problematizing the category, he's falling into the trap, and he's making this distinction between urban and the folk, which are nevertheless conceptual, imaginary, and linguistic categories, which I have a problem with. These categories do exist in our imagination. I do not know the characteristics, essence in the Kantian way, so to say. What is the essence of, say, for example, data? I do not pronounce it.
Yes, but the point is, I think he doesn't. I think he autonomous of Hindu communalism because he thinks of Hindu communalism as a pejorative thing, which is why he's using the pseudo-secular business. But for him, again, I don't quite agree that only because of material conditions. It's as if, communalism as an ideology is always guided by very negative intents and purposes. And as I said, I started by questioning that if you think of the community as communitarian and not something, terribly negative, what she was also saying, that ethnic identity or any kind of community, then, you should not think of communalism as something. And it is a technical sense only in India. I always have to explain why communalism is so negative in India. Right? Yes, you had a...
we have a very different understanding of communalism, right? So why are we, in understanding this essay, why are we bringing in that other understanding of communalism? Because how, the way we've been studying communalism is a difference between religions, and these were the categories which were followed. This was the ideology of people like Savarkar, which was very further divisive, which was led to partition, and so many people died. And perhaps that is the reason why it is associated with that pejorative term. So, when we understand community and communalism that's a different meaning, perhaps. But how we understand it here, it's an absolutely different meaning. So why are we associating that meaning to what
we are? Because we have to think that people can identify even with a sense of community, not only through religion. And I think we have to keep that possibility open. Otherwise, we will never. And many of the people who identified with it also identified it in a very different sense of religion. Because the Muslim community, as you know, was extremely heterogeneous. And Wells and Jinnah have shown that, as you know, Jinnah was not a practicing Muslim in any sense of religion. Yeah. And he falls back on religion as the only unifying element he could think of. And we'll come to that. Why he's arguing is precisely that the notion of the majority becomes so very important. So very important. Because policies are being framed on that basis. And as I said, democracy also is completely, fundamentally poised on the notion of a majority in the sense of consensus. As to who constitutes that majority is the point of debate. And as I said, unfortunately, when we were growing up, we did not think of this majority as only a Hindu majority. We didn't know who that majority was. We always thought it's based on consensus, and so dissent was legitimate. Dissent was a legitimate factor of Indian democracy. Something we are forgetting. So keep that in mind, because you are the younger generation. Very, very important. Andre Bete mentioned it a few years ago. Even before all of this happened, that dissent has always been a completely legitimate element of Indian democracy, precisely because, as I said, this idea of the consensus, we never really know. It was vague, but there was no clear sense of the democratic consensus. This majority being just a Hindu majority. Think of our electoral system. Think of our, the way the state is, everything. There was never a clear idea of, because most of the elements people say nations are based on, missing in it. No common language, nothing, right? So that is why I think it is very important to bring up these questions again and again. We should not say that it has become, that is the way it has wanted. It comes completely from the colonial categories and policies. That's why he said that the Muslims are in a state of shock, aristocratic Muslims. Once they figure out that they are. And the same with the Bengali Bhadralok in Bengal. Although the difference in numbers is much less. It's like 48-49%. But even so, they are a minority in numbers in Bengal. Again, they cannot accept it. That is the sense of entitlement and privilege. And that is what Said Amin is also saying, that we should not be based only on numbers but on status. He's saying it clearly, status. So what is status? Things that we do not reflect on, they did actually. It's your sense of entitlement, it's your sense of privilege, it's your sense of status. And see how we look upon it, right? Terrible. Let's say the person with whom this started. Why? Because he never joined the Congress. And he started the Muslim conference and all. But Muslim League is established in Dhaka, not here. And even as you know, I don't know how many of you know history, 1937 elections, it's performing very badly. But at the same time, the Congress also doesn't win in the Muslim majority provinces, something we often forget. But it's the same reaction of the Bengali party. It's a sense of entitlement. How can we be a minority when you never feel that you are a minority, when you do not have a sense of vulnerability, when you do not have a sense of insecurity, when you do not have a sense of precarious existence? Now suddenly to be marked out as a minority, not an easy thing also. Reactions stem from that. But that's the unfortunate effect. Now we think of the majority as a Hindu majority. It was not that clear, as I said, even when we were growing up. And we have to bring, for whatever, good or bad, we have to bring up these histories constantly, even of Indian democracy, in its independent state. And as I said, the problem began there. People were questioning the idea of the nation, the independent nation state we were going to get. It's not as if this questions hadn't been raised. What is Jinnah saying? He is saying that if Hindus form a nationality, we also form a nationality, something she brought up. He's not speaking of religion in that sense. He's saying we want equal treatment. Right? And as I said, because it also comes from that tremendous impact of being marked out as a political minority forever. They didn't want that. They want equal treatment. They want an equal treatment. Again, it's not surprising that it's the UP Muslims who supported it. As I said, they were never sure. They never thought that they will actually ever be able to go to Pakistan, even if it was formed. What Faisal Devji is saying. It's an idea when it comes up, it's laughed at, right? Only from 40s it becomes important. By 47 we end up having it. Why? Like we have to think of, and there the importance of an idea, which is why, again, you don't have to agree with the readings, but I think Faisal Devji is making a very, very important point. Yes. That is why I said imagining, imaginings or imagination, you can never control. And it is our problem that we think all imaginings have to be nationalist or sub-nationalist in some kind of a way. They are not. Ways of identifying, ways of thinking about the community. Yeah. Comments? Yeah. Yes.
To answer the question about Western, if you do secularism, I think a reference to the first note also makes it clearer. Because in the notes he's actually quoting it from Golwalkar.
Exactly, that's what I said.
So I think what he's trying to say is that there is a contrast between secularism as something which has been got from outside as compared to Hindu nationalism, which is seen something as Hindu nationhood is a truth born out by logic, experience, and history. Yeah. He is interpreting it as something spiritual and something religious rather than political doctrine.
Yes. Yes.
So that's why he's saying it's Western inspired pseudo-secularism.
Yes. Yes. There is a problem there, I agree. But I said he's probably, he doesn't put single quotes, but I thought he was referring to the Hindu nationalists here. But
make it slightly more clearer.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. See, he is saying his point. As I said, for me, it's not a new point because in my book, I'm not using this binary at all. I'm questioning it. He's saying breaking out of the binary of nationalism and communalism by showing a close relationship between Hindu nationalism and Indian nationalism. As I said, it's for me, at least as a historian, it's not anything new. We all knew that there were several Congress leaders who were also members of the Hindu Mahasabha from the time it was formed in UP and in other parts, right? And so Hindu nationalism is saying that Hindu nationalism per se is not a bad thing. We're also saying like it's some form of identification, contingent, but some form of identification. Did not necessarily take away from the cause of nationalism. Now the point is, what is nationalism? As I said, and what I brought up also, what it meant to be an imperial subject. Not all people are thinking of till very late. By 1942, Quit India movement, yes, it's very clear. What happens actually is with, first in Bengal with Swadeshi movement, but not everyone. Then Gandhi's non-cooperation is the idea of Swaraj, as I said, had an electrified movement. Even civil disobedience that did not happen. But for various reasons, anti-British feeling is extremely strong by the 1940s, which you see in the Quit India movement. And Gandhi, for the first time, is saying, if we go to jail, and he knew they would all go to jail, the Congress leaders, the first rank and the second rank, act as adult individuals on your own and decide. Gandhi was all for discipline, all for being true satyagrahis, which he never managed to get, right? But he's giving a speech before quitting him. It's not for Gandhi to say Bharat Charo. So by then there is a groundswell for good or for bad, which is why, as I said, all these people who were questioning, that what kind of the independent nation we want, they actually go into supporting the Congress line of let's first become independent and then we'll sort these problems out, and resolve problems. We continue with the colonial categories. We continue, as I said, with the terms of the discourse that were set a century ago. More comments?
I just
Yes.
have a question.
Yes.
He mentions about years here. He talks about the schematic images of social order. I have looked at years from the viewpoint.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Please use the microphone. Yeah.
He has talked about Chatterjee and Gears, so critical theories of nationalism and Chatterjee, which I don't, much have problem with. But then he mentions Gears, where he talks about the schematic images of social order. I have looked at Gears from a very different anthropological, ethnographic point of view, and I don't understand actually. I mean, what is the point of bringing Gears in this discussion here?
Anyone wants to? Yeah. Viva, you want to answer?
Yes, so culture is like very, very elementary, isn't that right? For thinking of ideas. He does quote Gramsci as well.
Yeah, he does. I was going to say that he quotes
Right?
Gramsci.
Yes. I mean, I have a feeling that he doesn't understand Gramsci or Wells both. He just put them for the sake of it. Have years in one paragraph followed by
Gramsci, yes.
I simply giving a very clear picture. He's not followed either of those two. That's my understanding.
I was quite surprised by this.
Yes. And I also don't agree. I mean, I didn't quite understand when he says that, just before he moves on to Gramsci and Goetz, that Hindu communalism, a kind of discursive framework that aligns the interests of social, cultural, political, economic of this imagined or constructed community precisely against the interests of other religious communities, particularly the Indian Muslims. Communism is more a historical condition than an ideology. I didn't quite get it, because I put 2 question marks there. Is he trying to say that the forces of, or the force of circumstances makes Hindu nationalism, which was nationalism of some sort, turn into communalism?
He also mentions that nationalism becomes a tool, ideological tool, which feeds into the development and extension of the communalism.
Yes, because and Gramsci, of course, uses mental framework. He's talking about, and Goetz is I think, is speaking of culture as this constitutive whole, or the web of meanings that.
But the way to conscience wise, you just don't flow.
No.
So, I mean, as a sociologist, I would never have years in one paragraph.
Yes.
More performative. And Gramsci, which is more talking about hegemony and counter-hegemony. Isn't that right? So, pretty uncomfortable with this narrative flow.
Yeah.
This would make sense.
Okay, something very quickly about Gyan Pandey? Yes. Of course, something he says that both develop in the same space, same mental framework, and they share the same discursive space. But as I said, for me, this was not a new argument. It's not something that I didn't know. But okay, very quickly about Gyan Pandey. Yes.
It's a nice read. It's a nice read. He also talks about something like the history of violence is very contextual, right? I don't know much to it actually. This violence is at the end of the day violence, right? And then he talks about the Bengali sentiment, about Deshbhag, about function, and movies which have or have not talked about, or any kind of form of art, which has actually looked at the particular form of violence. So if it happens in Rohingya or happens in Bangladesh or happens in India,
So when speaking about the Bhagavad rights, but anyway, please use the microphone, please. They can't hear you.
But he's talking about violence being something very contextual, right? But violence is at the end of the day is violence, right? I mean, wherever it happens, however it happens, right?
There can be epistemic violence, there can be discursive violence, there can be other kinds of violence. Why do certain groups feel threatened or vulnerable or precarious, even when they are not, let's say, attacked physically? So in that sense, it's contextual. But I think his more important point is, which he develops more in the partition book, that violence we always think, what he's arguing against is the idea that violence we think is something external. It's an aberration. It's something that only happens. And he says, if you speak to this community, always outsiders coming in, and causing this. What he's saying, it's a part of the everyday functioning of states and communities. Keep that in mind. It's very, very important. He's saying it's absolutely an ingrained part of the functioning of any state and also of communities, which again assert their identity in particular ways, which is why I'm saying, violence is epistemic. Also, obviously, it is, which is what, all this, post-colonial theory and arguing against the centrality of the West is about. It is very much epistemic, and it can be felt in different ways by different groups, actually, because you can never say this is violence. Why is what Koiri Vishwanathan is saying? Why is the moment of literacy and then conversion, that thought process, thinks of it as the beginning of the moment of violence? Because the idea is that this literacy or this education is intended to make those people convert eventually. So, let's say the Christian missionaries are causing violence to the people they are taking into this place. Which is a very warped kind of argument for me, but not for Vishwanathan, the people who think that way. But the thing is, violence is extremely difficult to pinpoint. We think of violence, okay, as physical violence, it is not. That's what I'm saying. So coercion, violence, therefore, is, think of the violence we go through, if you think about it, the increasing vigilance of the state, right? Even the increasing vigilance of the community, as I think, it's a part not just of the functioning of modern nation states. It's also a part of the functioning of communities that assert themselves in various ways. And we will speak about that with Veena Das. Right? What kind of violence can, cultural rights, hence I mentioned I want to go writing against culture. This extremely valorized idea of culture itself is violent for many. Right? Years ago, not now, a friend of mine went to Madhya Pradesh and she was told, why haven't you worn the bindi and the sindoor when you're a married woman? Right? It depends on how you feel it. In her case, she's not a vulnerable creature in the sense, again, belongs to the privileged groups. Right? But even so. So these are the things we will speak about. And culture, any reified idea of culture has an element of violence. Because why? Because you are forcing people to conform. You are forcing people to fall in line. So, and this will come up again and again, which is why, as I said, that we started with Said when he's saying that something thought to be completely aesthetic and the supreme form of culture, which has got nothing to do with power relations, how they're permeated by, violence in the sense. Jane Austen is not, Jane Austen is not conscious of the fact at all, right? But the way you present, right? The way you think that Australian space has to be made into a homeland, right? But India, of course, can never be made into a homeland. And hence it's, inscrutable first and then, completely barbarous and barbaric customs and So there is violence, to think about it very clearly. And I think that's an important point Pandey makes again and again. As to violence is nothing, is not something external, it's not an aberration, it's not something that happens only in particular moments. Violence is endemic.
Even media and the violence, interference of the media.
Yes. Absolutely. See, when I went to Mexico, they said, how is it possible that you don't have a birth certificate? And I said, I'm so happy that actually, not just because of the population, I'm so happy that I grew up in a state which was not as rich. That, all births and deaths did not have to be registered then. All marriages, now, of course, because of various reasons, for travel, all that. But I'm saying the state did not think of controlling its citizens to the extent. We often forget the new neoliberal trend in education. Now the employees have to punch in and punch out. And I said, soon it'll probably also be us who have to do it. I mean, just think of,
Students are doing it already.
Exactly. So just think of the extent of control. Isn't that violence of some form?
Because and also CCTV in every corner of the campus, in most campuses.
In hostels as well.
In hostels as well.
So if you're speaking of personal freedom, yes, I understand the need for discipline. But what is the assumption? The students or teachers are naturally irresponsible. So unless you control them, through some way, they'll not come for class on time, or they'll not, So think more about violence, think more about the violence of culture. We'll come up with it with Vinata, that's what he's saying. What if women feel that they do not belong to the community of Hindus or Muslims, but they belong to a wider community of women? Yes. Do we have an answer to that? We don't. Indian democracy started with, apparently, you said, features that were apparently brilliant because these were incompatible. You are granting, universal liberal equality. Along with it, you are qualifying it through our positive discrimination, because you know that conditions are not equal. Because liberal equality just accepts that condition being equal. You are aware that conditions are not equal. So it's a very noble gesture. Look at the way, all kinds of problems, but look at this. And the other one is that you protect the rights of, communities that feel that their culture or whatever has to be protected. Again, a very noble venture. Legal pluralism. In that sense, people have said that Indian constitution, Indian democracy has taken steps, and it's like an example for other societies to follow. But it's only in the workings of it that you see the problems. What are these cultural rights? How is it different? I will come back to it. It starts with Warren Hastings. Not in the 19th century. He's looking for a code of Gentoo laws. When I say that, it's a formulation, Hinduism as an ism as a formulation of the 19th century. He's not saying Hindu, code of Gentoo laws. From gentlemen, Gentoo, the people he's coming in contact with. In Bengal, code of Gentoo laws. For the Muslims, of course, they have the Sharia, so it's easier. It's a long and a fascinating history of how, we get classified, categorized, and governed along those lines. Indian society traditional, hence, you don't get me started on this, I could go on for hours. Indian society is traditional, hence, individuals, like the modern individuals, they do not function like individuals, right? They function through communities, and what kind of communities? Religious communities. Because as if they follow the dictates of their faith without questioning. That's the idea. Hence, religious communities. Why is he looking for religious communities to begin with?
Because the population is thought of as segments of various
Exactly. But it was their idea which gets imposed and internalized, which is what we have to question. Why did we internalize to the extent, to answer your question, why have we internalized this to this, terrible and dangerous extent? Which is the idea of impure identities. This is the idea of diasporic space. We have to argue against, pure native identities to the extent possible to avoid violence. Precisely, committing violence on others. We also constantly commit violence on others in very different ways. Think about it. I think it's past 12. Thank you. You will speak more about Faisal.
Even I have to speak about my research on violence.
Thank you very much. See you soon. 2:30, Abhishek? Yes. 2:30. No, 3. Is it 3? I'm sorry, I'm always confused. It's 2? Okay, fine.
It's 2, but we can